Hey guys, tonight we're curling up in the foggy tension of early 19th century North America. You're about to tiptoe into a world where the United States is still wearing its baby shoes. Britain is picking fights with everybody it sees, and everyone's tempers are shorter than a musket fuse. You're surrounded by old grudges, long speeches, and enough international drama to fuel 1,000 historical documentaries, none of which are going to help you sleep. Imagine the air smells of wet parchment and burned pin wood. You feel the worn leather of an old campaign chair under you. You're sitting in a candlelit room, maps sprawled across a table, the Atlantic breeze seeping through the window as angry old men shout about honor, embargoes, and shipping rights. And somewhere in the distance, someone's already composing a strongly worded letter. You're not going to survive this war, not because it's too violent, but because the politics alone might bore you into a coma. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're falling asleep from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1807, and you're floating across the Atlantic in a thin, creaky merchant ship, loaded with American cotton and nervous sailors. There's a tension in the air that smells like wet gunpowder. You're technically at peace, but it feels more like the kind of peace where everyone's just reloading slowly while maintaining eye contact. The United States is young, so young it's practically still learning to walk in its new constitution. And Britain's been fighting Napoleon's France on and off since the late 1790s. They're cranky, stretched thin, and deeply unimpressed with American independence. As you drift closer to the coast, you spot a British warship on the horizon. Your heart skips, not because it's illegal to be here, but because Britain, in all its imperial wisdom, still treats American sailors like they might secretly be British deserters. And unfortunately, they often are, or might be, or could be, or at least, that's the logic the Royal Navy uses when it boards your ship, drags off a few crewmen, and mutters something about press service. Yes, impressment, the deeply polite term for kidnapping sailors off your ship and forcing them to work for the British Navy because, technically, they were born in Liverpool. This goes over poorly. The US government files complaints. Britain shrugs. Tensions rise. Now add this juicy nugget. Britain also keeps blocking American trade with France, and vice versa, thanks to a sprawling series of trade restrictions and blockades. You, trying to sell a few barrels of flour, are suddenly caught in the crossfire of two global powers, throwing economic elbows like toddlers fighting over crayons. Jefferson's solution, the Embargo Act of 1807. You probably feel a chill here, not from the sea breeze, but from the sound of every American merchant groaning in despair. This act essentially tells American ships to stay home. No foreign trade. Nada. Zip. You stare at your now useless ship, rotting in harbor. Your income, gone. Your freedom of movement, gone. Your patience, hanging by a thread. Here's your science fact. Economic isolation like this can cause a form of collective national stress. Studies show that communities under prolonged economic pressure experience higher rates of insomnia, substance use, and interpersonal conflict, even centuries later, in long-term generational data. Congratulations! You're stressed in 1808, and your descendants might be grumpy forever. Meanwhile, Britain continues impressment. American sailors are yanked off ships like apples from a cart. The Chesapeake Leopard affair in 1807, where a British ship opens fire on an American one right off the coast of Virginia, sparks absolute outrage. You can almost hear the newspapers being furiously inked. Now, here's your fringe fact. Some people in Washington genuinely believe the British are encouraging Native American resistance on the frontier by sending mysterious spirit belts and ancient talismans. It's probably not true, but when you're a young country with a chip on your shoulder and a dozen conspiracy theories brewing, it's all fair game. At this point, Congress is foaming at the mouth, especially the war hawks, a lively group of politicians from the South and West, like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, who think war with Britain is the perfect way to defend American honor, expand into Canada, and stop British meddling for good. But scientists still argue whether the War of 1812 was truly inevitable or just a blundering collision of egos, bad communication, and geopolitics gone feral. You're now standing outside the Capitol in June 1812. It's hot. The mosquitoes are enormous. Congress declares war on Britain, and you're immediately struck by one major issue. The US isn't remotely ready. No standing army worth bragging about. No navy that can challenge the Royal Navy. A divided public. And oh yes, New England wants absolutely nothing to do with this. You hear rumors of people smuggling goods to the enemy because nothing says United Front like war profiteering in your own backyard. Still, the war is on. President James Madison signs the Declaration. He's about 5'4" and wears a perpetually worried expression. You'd worry too, knowing you just picked a fight with the world's biggest empire, using the military equivalent of a spoon. You might be wondering why Britain, locked in a death match with Napoleon, even bothers with the US. The answer: they don't, at least not at first. Their attention is still across the ocean, but they'll circle back, like a distracted cat that hears a mouse in another room. Back at home, American propaganda goes into overdrive. Songs are written, posters printed. You can almost hear the fife music swelling. War is romanticized, especially in the West, where visions of conquering Canada dance like sugar plums in politicians' heads. But here's your reality check. You've got a long, muddy road ahead. The war isn't going to be short. It's not going to be clean. And victory, it's going to be so ambiguous that even future historians will squint at it sideways. Still, the stage is set. You've got your knapsack, your wool uniform, and a letter from your worried mother. You step onto the road north, toward the Canadian frontier. You don't know it yet, but this war will make legends of fools, fools of generals, and somehow, despite everything, write the next chapter of American identity. A mosquito lands on your neck. You slap it gently and sigh. Welcome to the War of 1812. You've barely begun your march north, when you realize just how undercooked this whole operation really is. The boots pinch, the food's already going stale, and nobody's quite sure what the actual plan is. You're part of an ambitious American idea, to invade Canada and take it over like it's a neighboring garden shed. The logic: Canadians are technically British subjects, and if you just show up with enough flags and good intentions, they'll switch sides faster than you can say, manifest destiny. You arrive near the Niagara frontier, eyes squinting against a crisp September breeze. Trees sway above you, tall, spindly things that block sunlight like draped curtains. The air smells of cedar, damp leather, and something faintly moldy, probably your hardtack. It's 1812, and General William Hull is leading one of the first major U.S. campaigns into Canada. Technically, barely. You follow Hull's column up from Detroit, expecting glory, open arms, and maybe a few welcoming parades from grateful Canadian civilians. Instead, you find thick forests, loyalist militias, and French-speaking farmers who want you to leave their cows alone. Hull, bless him, is a Revolutionary War veteran, but now, he's in his late 50s, and commanding from a wagon while nervously chewing his lower lip. He's been promised reinforcements, but they don't show. Supplies run low. Morale dives like a greased turkey. The plan was to take Fort Malden across the river in British Canada. Instead, Hull dithers, sends letters, waits. The British commander on the other side, General Isaac Brock, is not waiting, and neither is Tecumseh, the Shawnee leader whose name everyone learns real fast once they realize he can mobilize thousands of warriors faster than you can lace your boots. Now here's your science fact. Forest acoustics in this region are famously deceptive. A gunshot in dense woodland can echo in ways that make it sound like an entire army is charging. This phenomenon plays a role more than once in the war, especially in panicking already jumpy troops. You're sitting on the banks of the Detroit River one evening when you hear rumors Brock and Tecumseh are coming. Hull panics. Despite having more men, more guns, and better supplies, he does the unthinkable. He surrenders the entire fort, without a shot fired. You blink. Wait. What? Yep. August the 16th, 1812. The entire garrison surrenders to a force that was dramatically smaller than his own. You're marched out with your hands raised, your boots muddy, your pride somewhere back in Ohio. The British hand out biscuits and smug glances. Hull goes home in disgrace, and the U.S. loses control of Michigan territory. Not the best start, but there's more. Down the frontier at Queenston Heights, another attempt is underway. The Americans try to cross the Niagara River and seize a strategic bluff. General Stephen Van Rensselaer, whose military experience is mostly theoretical, leads the charge. You're part of a wave of militia, crossing in tiny boats under enemy fire. Cannonballs skip across the water like deadly stones. You cling to the side, whispering apologies to the universe. Once you reach the Canadian shore, it's chaos. British troops, Canadian militia, and Tecumseh's warriors converge. The Americans manage to take the heights, briefly. Then Brock arrives, wearing his signature sash, and bringing the kind of organized fury you wish your side had discovered earlier. During the battle, Brock is fatally shot while rallying his troops. He dies dramatically, as all legends do, but his men fight even harder in his name, and by the end of the day, the Americans are pushed back. Many try to retreat, but the boats are gone. The remaining militia on the U.S. side refuse to cross the river to help. They claim their enlistment didn't say anything about fighting in Canada. You sit among the prisoners, wet and exhausted, muttering something impolite under your breath. Here's your quirky fact. During the early battles, both sides occasionally paused fighting to swap newspapers or borrow medical supplies, because even in war, apparently, you need to keep up with the headlines. Back in Washington, there's gnashing of teeth. The press churns out disappointment like clockwork. You hear whispers of replacements, of new strategies, of actual competent officers, maybe. But the main lesson, Canada is not just going to roll over. It's heavily defended, loyal to Britain, and winter is coming, fast. Still, there's hope along the Great Lakes. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry takes command on Lake Erie, where wooden ships float like fragile kindling. Perry's not your average officer. He's charismatic, bold, and occasionally a bit too obsessed with his personal flag. You're assigned to the ship Lawrence, and let's just say she's rustic. Cannons creak on their wooden carriages. The sails smell like salted cheese. But Perry believes he can build and train a navy from scratch, and somehow, he does. It's 1813 now, and you're facing the British fleet on Lake Erie. The battle is ferocious. Smoke chokes your lungs. Splinters fly. You load and fire until your arms ache. Perry's flagship is battered, nearly destroyed, but he refuses to give up. In a dramatic move that becomes legend, he rows across open water under fire to a second ship, the Niagara, and continues the fight. With fresh sails and momentum, Perry turns the tide. The British surrender, and in a note you hear recited endlessly afterward, Perry writes, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." It's short, dramatic, and exactly the kind of sentence that gets printed on mugs to centuries later. That victory gives the U.S. control over Lake Erie, and eventually leads to the recapture of Detroit. Morale finally rises. Not quite to victory parade levels, but certainly, maybe this isn't a total disaster territory. Still, scientists continue to debate whether the American invasions of Canada were ever truly feasible, or just wishful thinking by men who'd never seen a Canadian winter. You march back into familiar territory, frost forming on your sleeves. It's late 1813. You've got stories now of bungled invasions, unexpected bravery, and the weirdly soothing scent of pine, smoke drifting through army camps at dawn. You've learned not to trust politicians who say a war will be easy, or generals who keep spare wigs. The American dream of conquering Canada begins to fade, not because it's impossible, but because it's exhausting. The terrain is unforgiving. The enemy is well prepared. And honestly, you miss home. You sit under a canopy of stars, boots off, watching sparks drift from the campfire. Somewhere in the distance, a loon calls out across a quiet lake. It's strangely peaceful for a war zone. You don't know it yet, but the war is about to shift. Southward, seaward, inward. But for now, you breathe in the cold night air, and stare at the border that wasn't quite conquered. You wake to a sound you've learned to dread, boots scraping against frozen earth, and the sharp bark of an officer who thinks volume is a substitute for leadership. Your fingers are stiff from the cold. Someone stole your mittens 3 nights ago, and you've been using a pair of old socks ever since. They smell terrible, but in this war, terrible is your new normal. After the debacle in Canada, attention shifts south, toward the Ohio Valley and the American frontier. This isn't just about British redcoats anymore. This is also a war of alliances, especially with Native American nations, who are choosing sides, fighting for land, survival, and sovereignty in a conflict that was never truly theirs to begin with. You're trudging through dense undergrowth now, somewhere near the Maumee River. The woods here are thick, forests of oak and beech, shadows cutting the early morning light into strips. Mud clings to your legs like hungry hands. It's early 1813, and General William Henry Harrison is leading a push to recapture territory lost after Hull's cowardly surrender. You're headed to Fort Meigs, a hastily built stronghold of wooden palisades and mud-stiffened earthworks that looks more like a lumber yard than a fortress. But it has cannons, and more importantly, it has Harrison, who actually seems to know what he's doing. Mostly, the British want this fort badly, and they bring their allies to help them take it, particularly Tecumseh and his warriors. You remember that name. Everyone remembers that name. He's not just a warrior, he's a tactician, a visionary. He dreams of a united Native American resistance, stretching from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. It's bold, it's terrifying, it's powerful. And now, he's here. The siege begins in May. For days, cannon fire rains down like iron hail. The wooden walls shudder. You run from post to post, plugging holes with mud and prayer. Food is scarce. Water is worse. You eat dried beef that tastes like weathered bark, and sleep in shifts so erratic that time blurs into something soft and muddy. At one point, you watch a cannonball skip across the parade ground and take a man's leg clean off. He stares at the stump like he's waiting for it to grow back. You both laugh. It's not funny, but your brain needs some way to cope, and absurdity is the only thing left on the menu. Eventually, reinforcements arrive. The siege breaks. The British withdraw. Fort Meigs holds. Your science fact for the night: the psychological effect of prolonged artillery has been studied extensively, particularly in World War I, but its roots trace back to earlier conflicts like this. The constant, concussive force of cannon fire has been shown to cause sleep disruption, auditory hallucinations, and a type of battlefield PTSD, long before we had a name for it. You're relieved, but not done. Not by a long shot. Next, it's Fort Stephenson. The British moved down the Sandusky River to try again. This time, you're under the command of George Croghan, only 21 years old, with a face barely old enough to grow a proper beard. You expect disaster. Instead, Croghan pulls off a miracle. With only about 160 men, he holds the tiny fort against more than 1,300 British and native attackers. One cannon, just one, is all he has, and it's named Old Betsy. You man the wall, watching the gun crews load and fire, like clockwork. The cannon breathes smoke like a dragon, and somehow, you all hold. When the British finally retreat, it feels like someone forgot to tell them they were supposed to win. You sneak a sip of whiskey that night, pilfered from an officer's stash, and it burns all the way down. But it tastes like victory, like hope. Here's your quirky fact: in some corners of the American camps, soldiers genuinely believed wearing garlic around their necks could ward off illness and British bullets. Spoiler, it did neither. But it made the tent smell like a haunted pizzeria. But the war isn't just happening on land. Now the water's getting loud. Lake Erie was the appetizer. Lake Ontario is the next course, and it's more complicated than anyone likes to admit. You're posted to Sackett's Harbor, a shipyard and naval base on the eastern edge of the lake. It's winter now, cold enough to make your teeth ache, and your blankets feel like cardboard. The lake is frozen over, which means naval construction happens at a frantic pace. You hammer frozen planks, haul barrels of pitch, and hope you're not building floating coffins. The British launch an attack on Sackett's Harbor in the spring, but they're repelled. Just barely. You remember the smell of burnt rope, the weirdly musical clang of metal against frozen docks, and the way your hands wouldn't stop shaking after the battle, though you weren't sure if it was fear or frostbite. Meanwhile, both sides race to build bigger, better ships. It becomes an arms race, on water. Ship for ship, cannon for cannon. Whoever controls the Great Lakes controls the supply lines, and by extension, the war. Scientists still argue whether the naval campaigns of the War of 1812 were truly strategic or simply a result of logistical necessity. Some say the lakes were key. Others say they were distractions from the real action. You say they were cold, damp, and full of splinters. One night, you're on patrol along the lake. The water is black glass under the moonlight. You hear a loon cry again, somewhere far off, and it reminds you of that earlier night after Queenston Heights. There's something lonely about war on water. Land at least gives you somewhere to collapse. Water keeps you floating, endlessly. Nowhere to hide. But not all the battles are in the wilderness or on the lakes. In fact, some of the bloodiest ones are about to take place in your own backyard. You march south again, past burned-out cabins and fields lying fallow under frost. Civilians watch you pass with guarded eyes. Some cheer, some scold. Everyone is tired. Everyone is waiting for this to end. And then, you hear the rumors. The British are planning something big. Not in Canada. Not on the lakes. In Washington. In Washington. But you'll get there soon enough. For now, you rest your head against your musket and try to sleep. There's the faint rustle of squirrels overhead. The sweet smell of pine needles crushed beneath your back, and the ache of 100 miles in your bones. You dream of ships, forts, and a cannon named Betsy that won't stop singing in your ears. You wake to the sound of rain, tapping against canvas, and the sour smell of wet wool. Everything in camp is soaked. Your socks squelch when you move, and the firewood refuses to light no matter how much you beg, threaten, or bribe it. Welcome to the mid-Atlantic summer of 1814, where every puddle is a mosquito nursery, and every footstep is an invitation to trench foot. But you're not in the woods anymore. You're marching toward the capital now. Yes, the capital. The very idea seems absurd. Who attacks the capital of the United States? It's practically a glorified village with some marble ambitions, a few government buildings, a sprinkling of official types, and an overworked clerk population. Hardly a ripe military target, or so you thought. The British, it turns out, disagree. They're furious about York, the capital of Upper Canada, which American forces burned back in 1813. A fire for a fire. That's how this game works. And now they've brought battle-hardened troops fresh from the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. These aren't green militia or poorly trained colonial regiments. These are professionals, men who have danced with Napoleon's elite and lived to tell the tale. And they're headed for Washington. You're deployed to meet them, part of a hastily assembled defense force under General William Winder. His orders are vague. His strategy, murkier still. You're not even sure where you're supposed to be half the time. The British are coming by sea, sailing up the Chesapeake Bay like it's an invitation-only cruise. You end up at a place called Bladensburg. Let's be honest, Bladensburg sounds more like a dentist's office than a battlefield. But don't let the name fool you. This place becomes a punchline for the entire war. You take up position on a ridge overlooking a small bridge. The British arrive in orderly rows, and you do your best to look intimidating. But it all falls apart within minutes. First, the artillery crews panic and abandon their posts. Then, the militia, half your regiment, break ranks and run like rabbits who just heard a dinner bell. You follow because, well, it seems like a good idea at the time. There's smoke, chaos, and that strange, metallic taste in your mouth that only happens when you're about to die or vomit. Or both. It's called the Bladensburg races now. That's what history remembers. Not a valiant stand, not a heroic defense, a race, and not the fun kind. You run all the way back to Washington, with your heart pounding like it's trying to escape your chest, and your boots slapping the mud like a metronome of shame. Then comes the fire. You hide behind a hedgerow and watch as red flames lick the sky. The British march into Washington almost casually. No resistance, no fight. Just open doors and wide eyes. They burn the Capitol. They torch the White House. They even set fire to the Library of Congress. As if books were to blame for all this. The flames light up the night like a second sunrise. Smoke coils into the stars. You smell burning paper, scorched paint, and history dissolving into ash. There's something deeply surreal about watching your nation's capital go up in smoke while you chew hardtack and try to pretend this is all fine. Mainstream science fact of the night. Paper, when burned en masse, releases lignin-based compounds that produce a sweet, almost vanilla-like smell, particularly from older, acid-free parchment. So yes, Washington probably smelled like creme brulee and catastrophe all at once. By dawn, the fires are still smoldering, but the British don't stay. They leave after only 26 hours. Job done, message sent. Some say they feared a counterattack. Others say they didn't want to hold a city that had no real strategic value. Scientists still argue whether the burning of Washington was symbolic overkill or a calculated psychological maneuver. You just remember the ash. There's a strange peace afterward, a lull. Like everyone, American, British, even the mosquitoes, needs a breather. But war has a rhythm, and just when you think it's slowing, the tempo changes. Baltimore is next. You march north, boots heavy with mud and dread. Baltimore is different. It's got actual defenses, trenches, forts, cannons pointed in all the right directions, and most importantly, it's angry. The city knows what happened in Washington, and it refuses to go quietly. You arrive just before the bombardment begins. You're stationed near Fort McHenry, an imposing star-shaped fortress guarding the entrance to Baltimore Harbor. Inside, over 1,000 soldiers brace for impact. Outside, the British fleet assembles, dozens of ships bristling with firepower. It's September the 13th, and the night is going to be long. The bombardment starts like clockwork. You lie in a shallow trench, the earth trembling with each blast. Rockets arc across the sky. Yes, literal rockets, known as Congreve rockets, trailing sparks like angry fireworks. Mortars thump in the distance. The air is thick with sulfur, sweat, and the coppery sting of adrenaline. You can't sleep, even if you want to. Every explosion feels personal. Every whistle of a falling shell sounds like your name being screamed in reverse. It goes on for 25 hours, non-stop. At some point, you spot a young lawyer-turned-poet pacing the deck of a truce ship anchored just out of range. Francis Scott Key. He's come to negotiate the release of a prisoner. But now, like you, he's stuck watching the world explode in stanzas. And then, it stops. The sun rises, smoke clears, and there, still standing, like something out of a painting, is the American flag. Huge, tattered, glorious. The British have failed. Baltimore stands. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. Your legs wobble. You sit in the dirt and cry, not because you're weak, but because you're alive. Your quirky fact for this stretch: the rocket's red glare, referenced in Key's famous poem, were notoriously inaccurate. Congreve rockets had a tendency to veer off course, spin wildly, or just explode midair without hitting anything, but they looked terrifying. And in war, theater counts. Back in camp, someone starts humming a tune, then singing, then more voices join in. Oh, say, can you see? It's haunting at first. A lullaby stitched with cannon smoke, a melody braided with fear and relief. The song catches on. No one knows it'll become the national anthem. Right now, it's just a way to process what you've all survived. Baltimore becomes the turning point. The British realize America won't fold. Not entirely. Not yet. And you're still here. Dirty, tired, proud. You sit by a dying fire, sip something that might be once been coffee, and watch the stars blink overhead. You think about that flag, about running at Bladensburg, about standing firm in Baltimore, and you wonder what comes next. You wake with the stiff ache of someone who has slept in wet boots for too many nights. Your back crooked like an old oak from days of poor sleep in damp trenches. The faint smell of gunpowder still lingers in your nostrils from Baltimore, but there's a new scent in the air now: autumn leaves. The world is changing. The war isn't over, but the mood has shifted. You're redeployed westward, far from the smoked bricks of Washington or the waterlogged defenses of Fort McHenry. The focus turns to the frontier again. Ohio, Indiana, even down into the Mississippi Territory. It's back to skirmishes, raids, and irregular battles that feel more like ambushes than wars. And now, you face something less predictable than British redcoats: the wild politics of native alliances. You march through dense woodland, the kind of place where sunlight trickles through trees in broken gold. Everything smells of moss and decay. Somewhere out there, Tecumseh's legacy still echoes. His death in 1813 at the Battle of the Thames did not end native resistance, but it took the teeth out of its unity. You can feel the loss in the air: fragmentation, uncertainty, grief. You pass through villages, some empty, some cautiously occupied. Stories ripple through the camps like wind over tall grass. The Choctaw are fighting with the U.S. now. The Creek Nation is fractured. The Shawnee are scattered. Treaties are being drawn even as war continues. It's hard to know who's friend and whose future betrayal. Still, some alliances hold. Your unit is stationed near General Andrew Jackson now. Yes, that Andrew Jackson, who seems to have emerged from Tennessee wilderness with equal parts charisma and the emotional range of a wasp. The man looks like a scarecrow carved from fury, but he commands respect. You're sent south with him, down the Mississippi River, through Spanish-held Florida and into Louisiana. Every step you take squelches through swamp. The air becomes thicker, wetter, hotter. Your uniform clings to your skin like it owes you money. And the mosquitoes. At this point, you're convinced they've formed organized militias of their own. Still, there's a strange energy in New Orleans. A port city, yes, but also a cultural stew pot. French, Spanish, African, Native, Caribbean. Every corner smells of spice and sweat. Music drifts from taverns and windows. People speak in accents that make you lean in just to catch the rhythm of it. You arrive just in time for bad news. The British are coming again, and this time, they're bringing everyone. Over 10,000 troops are headed to New Orleans. The idea: cut off the Mississippi, split the country, and strangle the U.S. from the gut. It's a plan Napoleon himself might be cooked up if he wanted to ruin your holiday season. Jackson moves quickly. He fortifies the city. He calls on everyone: militia, pirates, yes, literal pirates, free men of color, frontiersmen, and even a small number of native allies. You're part of that hodgepodge now. Patchwork quilt of people who normally wouldn't share a bar stool, let alone a battlefield. The British land just south of the city in late December. Their bright red coats gleam in the sun, absurdly clean compared to your mud-stained uniform. They look like they've stepped off a postcard. You, meanwhile, smell like boiled boots and sadness. But Jackson has a plan. He builds a massive earthwork, called Line Jackson, across a narrow strip of land between the Mississippi River and a cypress swamp. He arms it with everything he can find. Cannons, yes, but also chains, sharpened logs, and barrels filled with nails. It's not elegant. It's terrifying. The battle begins on January the 8th, 1815. You crouch behind a mud wall, your musket ready, hands trembling not from fear but from adrenaline. The British advance in formation, drums pounding, bayonets shining. It's theatrical, it's insane, and then, chaos. You fire, reload, fire again. The air fills with smoke, shouts, and the thunderous roar of artillery. British troops charge directly into your line, and fall, over and over again. It's a massacre. Mainstream science fact, black powder smoke, the kind choking your lungs now, contains potassium nitrate and sulfur, chemicals that irritate eyes and mucous membranes. After just a few minutes, your visibility drops, your throat burns, and your vision blurs. You taste the battle more than see it. Jackson's army loses fewer than 100 men. The British, over 2,000. You sit afterward on a log, staring at the carnage. The field looks like a broken toy box. Red coats crumpled like discarded ribbons. And here's the kicker. The war was already over. Signed, sealed, official. But nobody knew. The Treaty of Ghent had been finalized in Europe in late December. But news travels slow when your fastest messenger is a ship that thinks, breathes, is a high-tech propulsion system. Scientists still argue whether the Battle of New Orleans had any actual military value, or was just a tragic coda to a war that should be ended weeks earlier. But emotionally, spiritually, it changes everything. America gets a hero, a legend, a sense of pride that had been stomped into the mud at Bladensburg. And you get to say you were there. Your quirky fact for this stretch: Jackson recruited the pirate Jean Lafitte and his band of smugglers to help defend the city. Not only did they bring men and artillery, but they also brought intelligence, maps, supply routes, even British naval plans. Imagine trusting your nation's defense to a guy who charges extra for stolen rum. When peace is finally confirmed, you're handed a tin mug and some questionable stew. The officers cheer. Cannons are fired in celebration. You stare at the flames and wonder what comes next. The war is over, but home feels far away. You walk the muddy levee of the Mississippi, watching paddle boats drift lazily downriver, and think about how far you've come, from the icy forests of the north to the swamps of the south. There's no grand reward waiting, no medals or monuments, but there's something softer, a kind of internal silence. You've survived, you've witnessed history, and now, maybe, you'll get a chance to live it. You lean back in the grass, the sky wide above you and full of stars. Somewhere, a fiddle plays a slow, sweet tune, and for the first time in years, the night holds no cannon fire, just crickets and dreams. The war is over, or at least, you hope it is. The Treaty of Ghent, signed in late December 1814, officially ended hostilities. But as you've learned, news travels slower than a tired horse on muddy roads. So you trudge onward, through fields and forests still scarred by conflict, not quite sure whether to raise your rifle or lower it. You feel the weight of it all, the blood, the smoke, the endless marches through mud and rain. And yet, despite everything, you find yourself strangely hopeful. The country you fought for is young, bruised but stubborn, like a colt trying to find its footing. You know it will stumble, you know it will fall, but it will rise again. You've seen the signs. The soldiers who fought alongside you are already talking about the future, about what America might become now that the British threat has receded. Trade will flourish. Expansion will continue. The frontier will push westward, promising land and opportunity for those brave enough to claim it. But there's also a deeper change, one that isn't marked on any map or recorded in any treaty. It's a shift in spirit. The war, with all its confusion and chaos, has forced the young nation to confront its vulnerabilities and its strengths. You remember the moment at Fort McHenry, watching that battered flag flutter against the smoky dawn. That symbol, tattered but unbroken, captured something profound. It wasn't just about land or politics. It was about identity, about belonging. And now, as the war fades into history, that identity begins to take shape. You hear stories from returning veterans, how the militia fought bravely despite their flaws, how regular troops stood firm against seasoned British forces. There are debates about what the war really meant, whether it was a second war of independence or just a series of unfortunate events. Scientists still argue whether the War of 1812 truly forged American nationalism, or if it was merely a catalyst for pre-existing sentiments. But to you, it feels like the birth pangs of something new. Your quirky fact: during the war, both sides struggled with communication technology. Telegraphs wouldn't become widespread for decades, so messages were carried by horseback riders, ships, and sometimes pigeons. Yes, pigeons. These feathered messengers were the wireless network of their day, unreliable but sometimes surprisingly effective. The war also pushed innovations in naval technology. The USS Constitution, famously nicknamed Old Ironsides, earned its name after British cannonballs seemed to bounce off its thick oak hull. It's one of the few ships to emerge from battle relatively unscathed, boosting American morale and proving that wood and determination could still hold their own against metal and might. As you trudge back home, the world feels simultaneously smaller and larger. Smaller because the boundaries you once knew are shifting, larger because the possibilities seem endless. The soldiers around you laugh more now, swapping stories about close calls and ridiculous mishaps. Like the time a British officer accidentally fell into a swamp and was rescued by an American who happened to be wearing mismatched boots. Or the time a troop of militia, thinking they were about to be ambushed, spent hours hiding in a haystack. Humor, it seems, is a universal solve. You realize that the war wasn't just about battles or treaties. It was about people. People who faced fear, hardship, and uncertainty, yet still found ways to hope and to laugh. And now, as the sun sets behind the distant hills, you settle down near a quiet stream. The water flows steadily, carrying leaves and memories downstream. You close your eyes, letting the gentle murmur of the current wash away the tension in your muscles. The war is behind you, but its echoes will linger, whispers in the wind, shadows in the trees. Tomorrow is uncertain, but tonight, you rest. The air is cooler now, the kind of crispness that hints at winter creeping closer, but you're still moving, never quite still. After the battles and smoke, the marches and chaos, you find yourself back in a world that's trying to breathe again. Towns are rebuilding, farms being replanted, and life unfolding in its stubborn, unhurried way. You walk through a small village, where the local blacksmith is hammering on an anvil. The rhythmic clang 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 echoes softly through the street. The smell of molten metal mixes with the earthy scent of wood smoke curling from chimneys. It's the sound of something being reforged. Maybe the nation, maybe just the village, maybe even you. There's talk of peace, of treaties, but the future remains a mystery wrapped in cold wind and fallen leaves. You overhear an old man telling stories at the tavern, stories about the war, about battles you weren't part of, about men you didn't meet. His voice carries a mix of pride and sorrow, the kind you recognize from your own heart. The nation's economy is a patchwork of hope and hardship. Trade routes are reopening, but the scars of blockades and embargoes linger. You know from your own hunger how fragile supply chains can be, especially in wartime. Yet, there's innovation bubbling beneath the surface, new factories, new roads, new canals, all promising a brighter tomorrow. Scientists still argue whether the war's economic impacts actually accelerated America's industrial growth, or merely delayed it. It's a debate for scholars in dusty rooms, while you feel the change in calloused hands and weary backs. Here's a quirky fact. During the war, some Americans began experimenting with early forms of interchangeable parts for muskets, a revolutionary idea that would later fuel the Industrial Revolution. The concept was simple but radical. Make every part of a gun identical so repairs could be quick and easy. It sounds obvious now, but back then, it was like trying to teach cats to do synchronized swimming. Walking through the marketplace, you notice goods from distant lands, sugar from the Caribbean, cloth from Europe, tobacco from the South. Trade is the lifeblood returning to these streets, and with it, stories from places you might never see. You find yourself reflecting on the war's deeper consequences, especially for Native American nations. Many fought alongside the British, hoping to preserve their lands and way of life. Now, with the war ending, and American expansion resuming, their future seems increasingly uncertain. It's a bitter irony. You fought for freedom, yet for many Native peoples, the war meant loss and displacement. You remember stories from the frontier, ambushes, forced treaties, broken promises. Some tribes were pushed westward, others resisted fiercely. The complex web of alliances and conflicts is a reminder that history is rarely simple or fair. Despite the weight of these realities, there's an undeniable resilience. Communities rebuild, cultures adapt, and the land itself seems to pulse with new life. You rest near a riverbank as dusk settles, the water reflecting a sky streaked with fading pinks and purples. The soft rustling of leaves and distant calls of birds create a lullaby for your tired mind. As you close your eyes, you think about what lies ahead, not just for the nation, but for you. The war has changed everything, yet life marches on. You, too, must find your place in this unfolding story. And in this quiet moment, with the world slowly spinning toward peace, you allow yourself to breathe deeply, to let the past fade gently into the background. Tomorrow holds promise, but for now, there is only the night, the river, and the soft whisper of leaves. The morning breaks slowly, a soft gray light spilling over the horizon like spilled ink blending into water. You find yourself back on the road, the familiar crunch of gravel underfoot blending with distant bird calls. The war has ended, but your journey, much like the country's, is far from over. The landscape stretches wide, a patchwork of fields, forests, and small towns waking to the day. The scent of damp earth and wood smoke fills the air, grounding you. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith's hammer rings steady, a reminder of rebuilding, of forging something new from the old. You think about the soldiers returning home, some greeted with cheers, others with silence. The wounds they carry aren't always visible: nightmares, loss, uncertainty. The land itself bears scars from cannon fire and burned fields, but time and rain begin to soften the edges. As you walk, you catch sight of a group of farmers, tending to freshly turned soil. Their hands move methodically, planting seeds that will grow into the next chapter. You wonder about the future of this young nation, how it will balance its dreams of expansion with the cost of what was sacrificed. One of the biggest questions on everyone's minds is the fate of the Native American nations. The war saw many tribes allied with the British, fighting to protect their homelands. Now, with the British gone, those alliances crumble, leaving native communities vulnerable to American settlers pressing westward. Scientists still argue whether the Treaty of Ghent truly addressed Native American rights, or simply set the stage for further displacement. It's a complex legacy, woven with hope, betrayal, and resistance. Your quirky fact for this stretch: the war inspired the creation of one of America's earliest professional military units, the Corps of Engineers. These soldiers weren't just fighters, they were builders, surveyors, and innovators. Their work laid the groundwork for canals, roads, and fortifications that would shape the nation's growth. You cross a wooden bridge over a calm river, the water reflecting a sky thick with clouds. The sound of flowing water is steady, soothing, nature's lullaby after years of cannon fire. There's a subtle tension in the air, too. Political debates rage about the future. Should America expand aggressively? Should it prioritize trade over territory? What role should the military play in peacetime? You overhear farmers discussing tariffs and trade routes, their voices low but urgent. They worry about foreign powers still lurking, ready to exploit any weakness. The economy is fragile but resilient. The war disrupted trade, especially with Britain, but it also pushed America toward self-reliance. Factories begin to sprout in the Northeast, spinning cotton into cloth, forging iron into tools. You pass a factory where the rhythmic clatter of looms blends with the hum of machines. The Industrial Revolution is just awakening here, a force that will change everything about work, life, and even war. You feel the weight of history pressing gently on your shoulders, like a familiar coat, heavy but protective. This moment, between war and peace, is a pivot point. What will you do now? What will the country do? The sun climbs higher, warming your face, and you keep moving. Past fields, past towns, past people whose stories you'll never fully know, but whose lives are stitched into the fabric of this place. At night, you'll dream of the battles left behind and the peace still to come. You'll dream of rivers and forests, of smoke and silence. And in those dreams, the future will slowly take shape. You wake to the soft light filtering through the trees, the forest around you alive with the gentle rustle of leaves and distant bird songs. The War of 1812 may have quieted, but the echoes ripple through the land, and into the hearts of those who live here. You feel it in the earth beneath your feet, the weight of history pressing softly, like a whisper only you can hear. You step into a clearing, where wild flowers nod gently in the breeze, and the scent of pine mingles with damp moss. The quiet is almost surreal after the thunder of cannon and the clamorous cries of soldiers. But beneath the calm surface, the story continues, shaped by people whose lives were forever changed. You remember how the war pushed America into a new stage of self-awareness. It wasn't just a conflict, it was a test of resilience, identity, and vision. The young republic, still finding its footing, had proven it could stand against a world power. Yet, the cost was measured in more than just land and treaties. Scientists still argue whether the war accelerated America's march toward modernization or merely delayed inevitable changes. By focusing energy on defense and survival, the truth probably lies somewhere in the tangled roots beneath your feet, complicated, intertwined, and evolving. Here's a quirky tidbit. The war's conclusion led to a brief but fascinating phenomenon called the Era of Good Feelings. It was a time when political divisions seemed to soften, and nationalism surged, like a sudden warm breeze after a storm. But like most breezes, it didn't last long. You wander through a small town, where families are rebuilding homes and lives. Children play near a creek, their laughter a stark contrast to the grim memories etched in older faces. The local tavern hums quietly, patrons sharing tales of valor and folly. You overhear a story about a soldier who, during a chaotic retreat, hid inside a giant hollow log to evade capture, only to find himself trapped inside for hours, his muffled curses blending with the calls of nearby birds. It's these human moments that bring history alive, reminding you that behind every battle were people just trying to survive. The war also sparked debates about America's future military. How should the country prepare for defense? Should it maintain a standing army or rely on militias? The discussions are heated, with no easy answers. One scientific fact you can't forget is that this war highlighted the strategic importance of controlling the Great Lakes region. The massive freshwater lakes acted like highways, vital for moving troops and supplies. Naval battles here were as crucial as those on the open ocean, proving that geography can be as powerful a weapon as any cannon. The quirky fact: at one point, a Canadian militia unit made up largely of voyageurs, canoeists skilled in navigating the lakes and rivers, played a key role in surprising American forces. Their knowledge of waterways was unmatched, turning the lakes into an extension of the battlefield. As dusk settles, you find a quiet spot by the water's edge. The surface is smooth, mirroring a sky streaked with pink and orange. The world feels vast and full of possibility, even after all the destruction. You close your eyes and let the calm seep in. The war's end marks not just a ceasefire, but the beginning of countless stories yet to be told. Your journey continues, and with it, the slow unfolding of a nation learning who it is and who it might become. The soft light of dawn slips through your window as you rouse yourself, feeling the lingering fatigue from days spent walking, reflecting, and witnessing a world in transition. The War of 1812, with all its battles and blunders, is now part of the past, but its influence courses through every corner of the young nation, like an electric current, subtle yet undeniable. You find yourself wandering the streets of a bustling town that's starting to hum with new life. Market stalls brim with fresh produce, handmade goods, and imported luxuries from overseas. The scent of freshly baked bread and roasting coffee drifts through the air, tempting your senses and reminding you that life, no matter how turbulent, always goes on. The war stirred more than just politics and military strategy. It ignited a cultural awakening. Poets, painters, and musicians began capturing the spirit of the times, weaving tales of heroism and hardship that would shape American identity for generations to come. Scientists still argue whether this cultural surge was a direct result of the war, or merely a natural evolution of a young country coming into its own. Either way, you feel the pulse of creativity everywhere you go. One quirky fact: during the conflict, the young nation's capital, Washington, D.C. was famously set ablaze by British forces. Yet, the city's resilience shone through as buildings were rebuilt, and the nation's leaders refused to let this act define them. In fact, the burning spurred plans for more grand and secure government buildings. You wander past a tavern where locals debate fiercely over politics, trade, and the future direction of the country. Voices rise and fall like waves, each speaker convinced their vision is the right one. It's a noisy democracy in action, messy, chaotic, and alive. The economy is beginning to pivot, too. The war's disruptions to trade with Britain forced America to look inward and innovate. Textile mills in New England start spinning cotton into fabric at an unprecedented pace, signaling the dawn of industrialization. You pause outside a factory where the rhythmic clatter of machinery blends with the chatter of workers. The future feels mechanical and fast-moving, a sharp contrast to the slow, rugged life of frontier farmers and soldiers you encountered earlier. Military strategy is evolving, too. Lessons learned from the war highlight the importance of a strong navy and better coastal defenses. The young country is investing in shipbuilding and fortifications, determined never to be caught unprepared again. Here's a scientific fact for you. The War of 1812 highlighted the strategic importance of naval power in controlling trade routes and defending borders, a lesson that shaped naval policies well into the 19th century. You chuckle softly as you overhear a tale about an American officer who, during a naval battle, famously wrapped himself in a hammock to avoid enemy fire. The story sounds more like a sitcom than a war anecdote, but these little moments of levity remind you that courage often has a quirky side. As the day fades into evening, you stroll along a riverbank, the water shimmering under the golden light. The landscape feels alive with history and possibility, a place where past conflicts fade into the quiet hope of tomorrow. You breathe in deeply, the scent of earth and water grounding you. The war may be over, but its lessons ripple forward, shaping the nation and its people in ways both grand and subtle. And you, traveler, are part of that unfolding story. The morning air is tinged with a fresh, slightly sweet scent, the promise of spring coaxing life from the earth. You step outside, feeling the soft crunch of frost underfoot as you wander through a quiet village, waking slowly from its winter slumber. The War of 1812 may be behind you, but the echoes of its impact ripple through this place in whispers and stories carried by the wind. Everywhere you look, the signs of recovery and change are evident. New homes are under construction, their wooden beams freshly cut and stacked neatly. Fields, once trampled and scarred by marching soldiers, are tilled and ready for planting. The sound of axes chopping wood mingles with the distant laughter of children, returning to schools that had closed during the conflict. You pause near a weathered stone monument honoring those who fought and fell in the war. Names etched deep in the granite tell tales of sacrifice and valor. It's a quiet reminder that peace is often purchased at a high price. Scientists still argue whether the War of 1812 truly united the young United States, or simply masked deeper divisions that would later erupt in civil conflict. As you observe the villagers going about their daily lives, you sense both unity and underlying tension, like a river flowing smoothly on the surface, yet swirling unpredictably beneath. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The war gave rise to the first unofficial national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, penned by Francis Scott Key during the bombardment of Fort McHenry. You might think an anthem would be stirring and triumphant, but it originally read like a detailed battle report set to music. You stroll into a bustling marketplace, where farmers, craftsmen, and traders exchange goods and stories. The chatter is lively, punctuated by the clatter of hooves on cobblestones and the occasional bark of a dog. Vendors sell everything from fresh produce to imported silks, evidence of a nation reconnecting with the world. Economic growth is uneven, though. While industrial centers in the Northeast thrive, rural areas and the South face challenges, especially with the disruption of trade and the lingering effects of British naval blockades. You overhear a debate about tariffs and trade policies, voices rising and falling in passion. The country's leaders grapple with how to balance protectionism with free trade, a discussion that will shape America's economic future. Military forts and defenses, once hastily constructed, are now being reinforced and modernized. The lessons of vulnerability are not forgotten. Engineers and soldiers collaborate on new fort designs, integrating lessons learned from sieges and battles. One fascinating scientific fact stands out. During the war, advances in artillery technology, particularly the development of more accurate cannons and explosive shells, changed the dynamics of battlefield engagements, making fortifications both more critical and more vulnerable. You chuckle softly at a tale shared by an elderly veteran about how a group of soldiers once attempted to train carrier pigeons to deliver messages, only for the birds to fly home to the general's house instead of the front lines. Sometimes, innovation comes with a healthy dose of failure. As dusk settles, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and lavender, you reflect on the resilience of people, rebuilding their lives from the rubble. The war's end marks not just peace, but the beginning of a new era, one filled with hope, uncertainty, and endless possibility. The land breathes deeply around you, alive with stories waiting to be told, as your journey carries you forward into the unfolding tapestry of history. The gentle hum of dawn greets you as you step outside once more, the world wrapped in a soft, pastel light that blurs the edges of trees and rooftops. You can almost hear the collective exhale of a nation settling into peace, even as new challenges quietly stir beneath the surface. You wander down a dusty road, the scent of fresh-cut hay and blooming wildflowers mingling in the air. Fields stretch out on either side, golden with the promise of harvest. Life moves forward here, deliberate and steady. The aftermath of the War of 1812 is a patchwork of recovery and reinvention. Towns and cities damaged by conflict are being rebuilt with bricks and hope. You notice a schoolhouse where children gather, their laughter bright and unburdened by the weight of recent years. The war pushed America toward economic independence, sparking a surge in manufacturing and infrastructure. Roads and canals, those lifelines of commerce, are under construction, winding through forests and fields, promising to connect distant corners of the country. Scientists still argue whether the war accelerated America's industrial revolution, or if it was simply a catalyst among many factors. Either way, the shift is undeniable. The country is on the cusp of transformation. Here's a quirky tidbit. To supply the army, some inventive entrepreneurs began experimenting with early mass production techniques, long before Henry Ford's assembly line. These methods weren't perfect, often producing more defect than finished goods, but they planted seeds for future innovation. As you continue, you find yourself near a river bustling with activity. Boats laden with goods and people drift slowly downstream, the creak of wooden hulls and slap of oars punctuating the quiet. The river is a highway, vital for trade and communication. The political landscape is no less turbulent. Debates about states' rights, federal power, and expansion swirl in local taverns and grand halls alike. You overhear voices questioning how far west the nation should reach, and at what cost. One scientific fact stands out. The war highlighted the strategic importance of controlling waterways, especially the Mississippi River, as arteries of commerce and military movement. You pause at a small village, where Native American families watch cautiously from the edges. The war's end left many tribes vulnerable, their alliances with the British shattered. The future is uncertain for these communities, caught between their own sovereignty and the relentless advance of settlers. You smile gently at a local blacksmith, who jokes about having to make weapons one day and plowshares the next. War and peace, all in a day's work, he says, hammering sparks into the growing dusk. The sun sinks low, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers over the landscape. You breathe deeply, feeling the weight of history and the quiet hope of new beginnings settle around you, like a soft blanket. With every step, you walk forward, carrying the past, embracing the present, and stepping into a future shaped by the lessons of war and peace. The early morning mist curls gently around your ankles as you step into the familiar rhythm of a waking world. The War of 1812 feels like a distant storm now, its thunder fading, but its ripples still lapping quietly at the shores of this young nation. You feel a strange blend of relief and anticipation, like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. The towns you pass are bustling with renewed energy. Children chase each other through narrow streets, their laughter a bright contrast to the grim tales whispered by older generations. You inhale the warm aroma of fresh bread baking in brick ovens, mingled with the earthy scent of turned soil and growing crops. This era is one of rebuilding and reflection. The wounds left by battles and burned cities are healing, though scars remain beneath the surface. You notice the sturdy walls of new government buildings rising proudly, symbols of a nation determined to endure and grow. Scientists still argue whether the war was a catalyst for American nationalism, or merely an interruption to the inevitable expansion and industrial growth. But standing here, you sense a newfound pride humming beneath the surface, subtle yet persistent. Here's a quirky tidbit. After the war, a wave of war hawks, young politicians eager for expansion, rose to prominence, pushing ideas that would lead to rapid territorial growth, but also tensions that eventually ignited future conflicts. It's like watching energetic teenagers ready to take on the world before fully understanding the consequences. You wander past a lively town square, where debates unfold about the future. Should the country invest in infrastructure? How about a standing army or a navy? Every conversation echoes with the urgency of shaping a lasting peace. The economy is shifting, too. The war's disruptions to British trade forced America to develop homegrown industries. Textile mills hum with activity, and the first steam-powered factories are changing how goods are made and transported. A scientific fact stands out here. Steam power, which was just beginning to take hold during this period, revolutionized transportation and manufacturing, shrinking distances and speeding up production in ways that would redefine society. You smile as an elderly storyteller recounts how some soldiers used maple syrup barrels to smuggle supplies, because, apparently, war logistics needed a sweet side hustle. It's these little anecdotes that remind you of the human ingenuity and humor that persist even in difficult times. As twilight descends, you find a quiet spot overlooking a river, its surface a mirror to the deepening sky. The water flows steadily, just as history does, sometimes turbulent, sometimes calm, but always moving forward. You feel the weight of what's come before and the subtle promise of what's yet to be. The War of 1812 is over, but its story is woven into the fabric of a nation still learning to walk, run, and eventually soar. And you, drifting here between past and future, are part of that unfolding journey. The soft rustle of leaves and distant chirping birds greet you as you wander through a countryside bathed in the mellow light of late afternoon. The War of 1812 now seems almost like a shadow in the distance, present but growing fainter as the nation moves steadily forward. You follow a narrow dirt path that winds through fields dotted with wildflowers and grazing livestock. The air is warm but carries a slight crispness, hinting at the approaching change of seasons. You breathe deeply, savoring the earthy scent mingled with faint smoke from distant chimneys. Communities have begun to knit themselves back together after the upheaval. You see families tending their farms, children chasing after chickens, and neighbors sharing stories on porch steps. It's a simpler life now, but one forged by hardship and resilience. The war's legacy lingers in conversations. You overhear a group of farmers debating the merits of investing in new tools and machinery versus sticking to traditional methods. Change is in the air, but not everyone is eager to embrace it. Scientists still argue whether the conflict hastened the nation's shift from agrarian roots to industrial prowess, or if that change was inevitable due to broader global trends. Whatever the truth, the gears of progress are turning, slowly but inexorably. Here's a quirky tidbit. After the war, some enterprising folks tried to sell war relics to tourists, including old cannonballs, discarded uniforms, and even bits of battlefield dirt. It's early American memorabilia, and apparently, people were willing to pay to own a piece of chaos. You stroll into a town where a new newspaper office buzzes with activity. The press churns out sheets filled with news, opinions, and advertisements, fuel for the growing public appetite for information. Literacy rates are climbing, and the spread of ideas quickens. The political atmosphere is charged. New leaders debate policies on tariffs, Native American relations, and westward expansion. The question of how to maintain peace while growing the nation weighs heavily. A scientific fact you might appreciate: the war highlighted the strategic importance of controlling transportation routes, such as roads, rivers, and canals, which spurred investment in infrastructure that would unite the sprawling country. You chuckle softly as a blacksmith recounts a humorous tale of accidentally forging a horseshoe so poorly shaped it caused a horse to moonwalk instead of trot. It's a reminder that even in serious times, human error and laughter persist. As dusk settles, casting long shadows over the rolling hills, you pause to reflect on the quiet strength of this land and its people. The War of 1812 may be a chapter closed, but its influence will echo in the years to come. With a final deep breath, you continue your journey, walking forward with the steady heartbeat of history beneath your feet. The evening air wraps around you, like a soft blanket, cool but comforting, carrying faint scents of pine and wood smoke. You find yourself on a quiet hill, overlooking a valley where lights begin to twinkle like distant stars. The War of 1812 feels like a fading echo now, but its pulse remains woven into the very soil beneath your feet. Villages nestled below bustle gently with life, people returning home after a day's work, sharing meals, laughter, and stories that stitch their community closer. You feel the steady rhythm of resilience, a testament to human endurance through trials. The war's conclusion set the stage for a nation not just surviving, but dreaming bigger. The borders might have held, but the spirit of expansion and ambition burns bright, carrying promises of new frontiers and possibilities. Scientists still argue whether the War of 1812 was a defining moment of American identity, or simply a footnote in a broader story of change and growth. But from where you stand, it's clear this conflict nudged the young nation into its next chapter. Here's a quirky tidbit to carry you through. After the war, some veterans formed informal reenactment groups, long before such hobbies were popular, gathering to relive battles and swap tales, proof that even amidst recovery, the past fascinates and inspires. The economy hums with new energy. Factories hum, canals link distant regions, and cities begin to blossom. Yet, challenges remain. Native American tribes face displacement, political factions spar fiercely, and the country wrestles with questions of unity and justice. A scientific fact to ponder: the war accelerated innovations in communication, including the use of semaphore signals and early telegraphy concepts, which would soon revolutionize how information traveled across vast distances. You smile softly at a tale shared by a traveler about a local innkeeper, who, during the war, kept soldiers' spirits high by serving victory pies, pastries filled with unexpected ingredients, and a healthy dose of humor. As night deepens, stars scatter across the sky in a quiet cosmic dance. The land breathes beneath the moon's gentle glow, whispering stories of courage, loss, and hope. You close your eyes, feeling the steady heartbeat of history merge with your own. The journey through the War of 1812 has brought you here, calm, reflective, and quietly hopeful. Now, as you prepare to drift into sleep, let the echoes of this story lull you gently, carrying you into peaceful dreams filled with the promise of tomorrow. The night settles softly around you, like a gentle caress, the distant stars twinkling through the velvety darkness, with a quiet, timeless grace. Your breath slows, matching the peaceful rhythm of the world as it turns gently beneath the moon's watchful gaze. The echoes of history fade softly, their edges blurring into a calm stillness that invites rest. You are held in the warm embrace of night, where time slows, and the stories of the past settle like a whispered lullaby. Feel the gentle pulse of the earth beneath you, steady and unwavering, as if the land itself breathes with you. The challenges, the battles, the hopes and fears, they all dissolve into the quiet night, leaving only peace. Let your mind drift like a leaf on a calm stream, floating effortlessly through the cool darkness. Tomorrow awaits with new light, but for now, you are safe, sound, and carried gently by the hush of the night. Close your eyes, surrender to the softness, and let sleep come easy, weaving dreams spun from courage, resilience, and hope. End of script. Sweet dreams.